to our first Xenia series of 2021. It seems very nice and comfortable to say 2021. Over the past year, we have all had our behaviors, our relationships to those close to us and those far away from us change. And through anthropology and through this community that we have here in the Xenia series, we've been able to feel close and connected again from time to time. I, like many of you, first was interested in anthropology as a way to learn about worlds that I could never imagine connecting with in person. And as became more of an anthropologist, learned how to describe worlds to others. Today, Christiane is going to describe a world that many of us are unfamiliar with and are waiting to hear more and more about. Tom Selwyn, in his recent description of the first year of Xenia 2020, said this. He said, the big question going forward is, what are the conditions in which we will be able once again to conceive of a world in which Xenia, hospitality, can be recovered as a guiding principle of global, regional, and local social organization. And so it's with that thought, that very important thought, that I hand the introduction to Tom Selwyn.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And I'm going to introduce Christiane to us this afternoon. And I'd like to introduce her by recalling the time that I was first introduced to her in Bethlehem by Hani Aboudaei in 1995. Hani and I had met in the North Red Sea resort of Taba in that year at a large conference of tourism specialists, including tourism ministers from many parts of the Mediterranean and points east, north, and south. Elias Frege, then mayor of the city, represented Bethlehem. The declared purpose of the conference was to prepare the ground for an expansive area, the world of Ibn Battuta, we could say, in which travelers, tourists, and pilgrims could move more or less freely, as they did, to quote Christiane, quote, in a past framed by the seamless mobility of people compared with the visa stroke, barrier stroke, checkpoint systems of today. These thoughts infuse and underpin the book she launches today, A Moon Will Rise. From 1995 onwards, I've had the good fortune to work closely with Christiane, Hani, and other colleagues in Bethlehem, mostly centering on the university in the travel, tourism, pilgrimage, cultural heritage, hospitality, Xenia field. Christiane was one of the leading lights in Bethlehem 2000, the group tasked with preparing the city for the Christian millennium. This gave rise after 2000 to the Center for Cultural Heritage Preservation, CCHP, of which she became the director. Since those times, she has worked with several international agencies, including the European Commission. Her innovative, scholarly, and managerially acute trans-Mediterranean work has deepened what she describes as her, quote, experience and knowledge of the Eastern and Southern Mediterranean and of the complexities that make up what is known generally as the Mediterranean culture. During this period, the paths of many of us have crisscrossed in cooperation with friends and colleagues in London, Finland, Italy, and cities in the Mediterranean region in two large programs of work in the TTP cultural heritage field, sponsored by the European Commission, Tempus and MedVoices. Out of Tempus came the MA in tourism, which is going strongly at Bethlehem University today. And out of MedVoices came all sorts of essays, films, and exhibitions and so on that came through the cooperation between our 13 Mediterranean cities. And what Christiane says about Bethlehem 2000, and we might add also some of the networking that we've done since, they speak, she says, of, quote, historical moments that seem to some to hold the promise for peace in the region and beyond. Many of the participants here today will know Christiane for her book, Palestinian Cookery. I don't know whether you can see this, but even if you can't, that is the book that I'm going to quote from a few words now. She is indeed the finest chef I know. In a very recent essay on the role of food, materially, culturally, symbolically, in Palestinian identity work, she makes several points which I would like to quote as they provide us with a clear route map into her present book. First, she observes that Palestinians live in a region located at the crossroads of 3 continents, and that the product of this crossroads is, as she says, openness to the other and receptiveness to ideas of different ways of doing. Second, the study of Palestinian food, as she puts it, leads you to understand, as she puts it, connections to a wider network of regional and global exchanges that have influenced socio-cultural systems and food practices at local levels. Third, the civilizational networks that came into being over the millennia since the emergence of cities in the Fertile Crescent and Mediterranean world, to quote her again, integrated urban core, agrarian fringe, and pastoral hinterlands, as well as, quote, an interdependence that went beyond mere commercial transactions. And she gives the example of trade in wine in jars that went from Gaza to Memphis and then returned to Syria full of water because of the water being scarce there. Fourth, she asserts that food culture as part of identity formation is a theme promising huge treasures in an underexplored field. Food production and consumption is one of the main forces of community solidarity across both home and the diaspora. Fifth, and finally, the hospitality, Xenia, within which food plays a central role, is, to quote her, one of the means by which societies change, grow, renew, and reproduce themselves. And, as she says quite rightly, as the bursting of Palestinian food on the world scene allows us all to celebrate unabashedly what is truly Palestinian, shared as it is with kith and kin and whoever happens to knock on one's door. So the last few sentences, the last paragraph is as follows, and this generalizes. The key terms here seem to me to be openness to the other, networks of relations, interdependence, community solidarity, and hospitality, Xenia itself. These form part of Christiane's own deeply felt ideas, values, and identity, and are the foundation of A Moon Will Rise, a powerful exemplar of a narrative that is at once intimate, regional, and global, and which provides us with a unique insight into the centrality of Bethlehemite and Palestinian culture more generally in today's troubled world.
It's exciting finally to be able to share this long process with friends and colleagues. Thank you, Tom, for this presentation. It really helps to cut back on my time. So I just put my timer so that I don't go over the time allowed, so that we can have a discussion after the presentation. The A Moon Will Rise is a novel that is set in Bethlehem in 1920. Just as Palestine is recovering from World War I, from hard years of locust invasion, famine, and hardships. And already, and just as the British mandate is being established, already there's a sense of foreboding about what the British mandate will mean after 400 years of Ottoman rule. Very quickly, tensions between the Palestinians and the waves of Jewish immigrants sparked riots on 19 April 1920 in an event which is called the Nabimusa Festival. And it sets the tone for open warfare, which, as we all know, will erupt in 1948. And it will lead to the dispersal of the Palestinian nation. The novel focuses on the life of one young woman, Samira Lafiah, who is from a prominent but strongly conservative family who finds that her life chances are blighted by society's rigid conventions. As she struggles to find herself in society, she defies her mother, her brother, who is also her guardian, and her family, discovering love and disappointment, experiencing tragedy until she finds her course. Throughout this tumultuous journey, only one person understands her dilemma: Ibrahim Malik, her brother's friend and a socially marginalized refugee. As particle of the social, economic, and cultural life in Bethlehem, the family Lafiah testifies to this period, which is replete with turbulence, uncertainty, and confused positions. And this situation has become symptomatic of Middle East politics up until today. In the context of 1920, there are four major historic events that form the backdrop to this novel. First, we have the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which is an agreement a secret agreement between France and Britain, and it reneged on promises the British had made to Sheikh Hussein from Arabia to create an independent Arab state in Greater Syria, what I will refer to from now on as Bilad al-Sham. It's an instance, and to me, you know, this agreement is an instance when peace agreements, because supposed to be a peace agreement, legitimate dividing people based on ethnic affiliation or other attributes that make peacemakers use as an excuse for their convenience and to serve the powers that be. Needless to say, there are similar examples in Europe and other parts of the world in the arrangements and the reshuffling of borders that happened after World War I. The second major event is the Balfour Declaration of 1917, a highly contested agreement that gives rise to riots and opposition by different political groups amongst the local population. The third event is the King Crane Commission. It's a commission appointed by President Woodrow Wilson, and it came to Palestine in July 1919 and submitted its findings at the Paris Peace Conference the following August. The commission collected 1,875 petitions, 72% of which were hostile to the Zionist plan for a Jewish national home in Palestine. Such findings, coupled with Zionist talk of dispossession of the Arabs, led the commission to advise a serious modification of the Zionist immigration program in Palestine. These modifications were never realized. The fact that the British and the French refused to take part in the commission for fear of having their imperialist ambitions in Greater Syria and the Fertile Crescent thwarted weakened the commission's role and its impact. The fourth event is the Nabimusa Festival, an event that was celebrated at national level, ends in riots where 5 Jews and 4 Muslims are killed, and several hundred are injured. This event should have sounded the alarm for the British not to proceed with their policies towards consolidating Jewish presence in Palestine and provoking further tensions in Arab-Jewish relations. A huge political rally followed when public figures expressed clearly their grievances against British policies, which, as history shows, became increasingly biased against the local population. So the story of the family, Lafiah, is enmeshed with these events. I hope you will be able to read the story, but I would like to point out, to use the time I have, to just point out to some important themes that emerge in the novel, and that resonate with, some of them resonate with what Tom has been talking about. I would like to mostly refer to the idea of social change. It is an important thread throughout the novel, and it portrays a society on the move, a society that is cosmopolitan, well-traveled, an urban culture that is in some respects quite sophisticated. And this is in sharp contrast to travel accounts, explorers' reports, biblical specialists' accounts that have established assumptions on the country and the culture and obfuscated the reality of the Palestinian people who are defined by this culture and are its bearers. These accounts are striking because they are very sketchy in their description of the people, which in an extreme form was embodied in the slogan, "A land without people for a people without a land." Now, the social setup of Bethlehem at that time was very patriarchal. The Lafiahs, and I would like to now start sharing with you my screen. Yeah. As I speak, I will show you some pictures of Bethlehem. Some of them go back to the 1920s. This first slide shows the cover of the book, which was designed by a friend of mine in Jerusalem. And in fact, my publisher proposed the title, and it comes from a quotation by Mahmoud Darwish, who is a quintessential contemporary Palestinian poet. This is the story of Bethlehem from 1925. And it shows the old city, the cluster of the old city, which is very homogeneous and very compact. And this is a city of Manger Square, which figures a lot in the novel. And this is another picture of a market day with the women wearing their shatwe, the headdress, and the white veil. So, as I said, the Bethlehem society was very much patriarchal. The Lafiahs live in a traditional hosh, which is a family complex that is private and closed off from the street. So you have Saleh Lafiah, who is a Mukhtar, who is a notable and leader of his clan. His mother, who is a formidable matron who wields a lot of power inside the hosh. And in contrast, we see another family, the Badrs, who live in a mansion as a nuclear family. So already we start seeing this shift in the family structure and in the physical landscape of the city. This is an entryway to one of the ahwash, and this is the courtyard of an old hosh that goes back to the 18th century. And as you see, it's closed off from the street. It's very private. And here is a mastabe that you heard, if those of you who read the first chapter that Jeff sent you, a mastabe is this sort of wide windowsill or a sill outdoors that people sit on to look over towards the street or towards the wadi and so on. And this is the new, this is an example of the mansions that started sprouting outside the old city in the 20th century. So it's much more open to the street. It doesn't have the privacy. It has amenities, modern amenities, and so on. And I would like to show you the landscape around Bethlehem, so you can imagine when, and if you read the novel, you can imagine what we are talking about, because one of the important events in the novel is the olive harvest. So the Badrs live in a mansion as a nuclear family. And like I said, they reflect a changing lifestyle in terms of the spaces and the amenities they provide. And contrary to what people might think, the emergence of the landscape of the mansions and the changing lifestyle is not the result of European penetration in the country. European penetration did play a role, but because Bethlehemites were traveling all over the world, they were bringing in new ideas, they were bringing in income from trade and commerce, and they were developing a taste for modern, for a different lifestyle, as it were. So, and it was mostly in Bethlehem, it was mostly the Christian families who lived this lifestyle. But not exclusively, because we have in Nablus, in Gaza. Gaza was for a long time the capital of Palestine, and you have a lot of examples within Muslim families. So if we go on comparing between the Lafiahs and the Badrs, the Lafiahs are a family of notables who work in the manufacturing of mother of pearl and religious artifacts. And this is very much a trade and the production and manufacturing that is very, very very much associated with Bethlehem. And they export to Europe and the Americas. And their trade represents the backbone of the Bethlehem economy, together with tourism. The Badr's livelihood, however, is real estate. And we see how already how land is becoming a commodity, a sort of for trading, and how the gentleman Badr is a speculator in land, which is frowned upon by the Lafiahs, who think that land is a source of honor, and nobody sells their land unless it is in extreme cases, because it's a form of honor and it gives a status to a family. If we go to the issue of women, because nobody can talk of anything these days without going into the gender issue, it is mostly the women who, actually it is the women who embody aspects of social change. The men, yes, they travel, but the women are the motors of change. Within the Lafiah family, we have one daughter-in-law who is a Bethlehemite who was born and raised in Paris, and whose parents have emigrated from Paris to Honduras. So she has adapted to the Lafiah traditional styles, but she comes from a family that is perceived as modern, and her mother, in contrast to herself, is a glamorous socialite, just like Mrs. Badr is. So here we have all these different manifestations of how women were in those days. And the Badr wife is also considered glamorous, and there is a very important scene in the book where she gets a haircut. So you can imagine the scandal that this must have caused, the haircut. But the most important character who breaks traditional borders is Samira, because the change that she brings about is very fundamental, as opposed to change that is mostly social and so on. The social change is also apparent in the dress. So you have a whole range of clothes that is worn by the women, from the latest in Paris fashion to the traditional malak. Saleh himself, who is the Mukhtar, wears a suit. But when he goes to visit his lands or his foreman, he wears the traditional kumbaz and the fez. So, so dress is very important. And there's a scene in Jerusalem which describes, because you have pilgrims, you have the Muslim pilgrims from the Nabimusa Festival, you have the Easter pilgrims from Russia, and you have the Christians and Muslims of Jerusalem. So you have this melting pot of languages, etc., that you see in Jerusalem. And to a certain degree, change is also in the naming, because Christian families of Bethlehem started giving French names, especially to the daughters, because the men have to take the grandfather's name and so on. But with the daughters, so you have a mixture of naming. Another theme which is extremely important is the theme of mobility. And I would like to go back to this old map of Bilad al-Sham, these were open borders, and we see the wife of Samira Lafiah going to Aleppo and then to Beirut, open borders. But when she comes back, she tells the story of changes. At that time, the French and British were negotiating on how to draw the borders of a geographic and cultural area that was open during Ottoman times. So, and then the family discusses the new taxes that the British are imposing on imports from Syria. So there you go. So from a large sort of Levantine space, they start emerging what we call in modern parlance nation states, with all that it implies in terms of borders and taxes and so on. And unfortunately, these borders continued slicing the area. And today Bethlehem is surrounded by an 8-meter-high wall. So the more we go in time, the more the space has been shrinking. You have Europe creating the European Union and open borders, and we are shrinking behind our wall. And as I said, the land also is a source of honor, and the maintenance of the dry stone of your dry stone walls is a reflection of how much you take care of your land. So the dry stone walls become a sort of symbol. And if you look at, if you remember the photos I showed you, you have the whole landscape around Bethlehem is full of terraces and stone walls. And of course, you have intercommunal relations. You have the Latin community, which is the Catholic community of Palestine. They call it Latin, going back to the Crusaders. And you have the Orthodox community and relations between them. And you have Ibrahim Malik, who is from the Assyrian community and who is more educated than Samira Lafiah, who is the notable, and who always has this outsider's look on the situation, and who is, of course, interested in our young woman, Samira. So what do we learn from all this? As Tom said, Tom mentioned the fact that Palestine is at the crossroads of 3 continents. But we, as Palestinians, are very conscious of the fact that we belong to a part of the world that is considered the cradle of civilization and of the 3 monotheistic religions. And we are also influenced by the fact that it is located on the crossroads of 3 continents, which privilege exchange, trade and commerce, but also mobility and cross-cultural exchanges. We consider our culture as hybrid, in the sense that it has integrated many influences, and it is marked by openness to the other and receptiveness to ideas and different ways of doing things. Contrasting with this self-perception is the view that it's also a country that has been a free-for-all, mostly based on the description of European travelers who only saw it as the Holy Land, mostly ignoring its inhabitants, and if they really must mention them, they will vilify them as a miserable and backward lot and denigrate the desolation of the landscape. It is such descriptions that sponsored the necessity for a civilizing mission to justify the respective countries' imperialist ambitions. 100 years later, today, the world is tinkering with human rights, with democracy and liberal ideologies, and a bunch of sophisticated tools in support of them, while virulent expressions of nationalism and hardcore views of identity in the form of Brexit, Trumpism, white supremacy, Hungary for the Hungarians, India for the Hindus, are common fare. At one level, a moon will rise shows a world that is disintegrating. Today's world is even messier, and it should be a warning about where all this is taking us. With the backdrop of rising nationalism and extremist right-wing ideologies, we need to elaborate a new discourse that will move the margin towards the center. And I'm using here Olivier de Fauville, a professor in international law. It is his term. Yesterday, I was listening to an interview with a person called Avraham Burg, who used to be a member of the Knesset in Israel and who was the director of the Jewish Agency. Recently, he disclaimed his registration as a Jew with the Ministry of Interior because he felt he could no longer identify with Israel's definition of the Jewish collective as it was redefined by law. According to him, this Jewish collective is missing the basic DNA of minorities, equalities, and different expressions of the self that is inherent to Judaism. And that is translated in different but equal and equal but different. And I got to thinking, if such people, such prominent people could be the majority as opposed to the exception, then we might still have hope for the region and perhaps even for the world. I would like to read a small passage and then we can go to our discussion. When Saleh left Haret al-Fawagri, the morning was almost spent, and he could not see the point in going back to the workshop or to his office. So he passed by Labib's cafe to kill an hour before going home for lunch. As always in winter, the atmosphere was stuffy with the pungent smell of stale clothes, unwashed bodies, and shisha, which even the excellent aroma of Labib's cafe could not diminish. In summer, the blend of sweat and dust hung in the air. Saleh hated all these odors that clung to his clothes, and yet he could not stay away because it was the place that pandered to his ego and self-importance. When he got there, he found a song scratching from the amplifier of a gramophone sitting on a low table by the door. A man stood motionless, gazing at the machine while repeating, "The wonders of Allah." A group of men smoking shisha close by poked him playfully and teased him, while the waiters rushed about laden with trays of coffee and tea. Saleh sat on one of the low wooden stools and ordered a strong coffee without sugar. "I need a real fix," he told the waiter, and a couple of the regulars laughed and remarked that he certainly had a sense of humor, the Mukhtar. Saleh was about to join them in conversation when he was silenced by the sudden appearance of Itab Mustafa, a school teacher, barging through the door. "Did you hear the news?" He was waving a copy of Mir'at al-Sham. "What news, ya Itab?" said many men in unison. Itab was one of the few Muslim men who frequented the cafe. He appreciated a good joke, did not squirm at the flow of Araq, and never judged a person based on his faith. His Christian comrades could worship as many gods as they wanted. They could split Allah in as many parts as they wished, and eat him and drink him as often as they pleased. He did not care. They, on the other hand, accepted him on the simple basis that he could pass as one of them. Itab held up the paper and read from the prompt page. Faisal returns home, crowns himself king of Greater Syria. Based on decisions of the General Syrian Congress at its first conference, which was held in Damascus on July 2nd, 1919, Faisal has crowned himself king of independent Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Transjordan. The news was met with silence for a few moments, followed by an explosion of applause and cheers. "What a man! He did it! He really did it!" said Saleh, shaking his head in disbelief. "Finally," said the man next to him. "And I always thought Faisal was just a conniving go-getter, a puppet in the hands of the Allies." "Ya Labib," Saleh called out, "get us a round of Araq. We have to drink to this. Put it on my account, man." As far as the coffee shop was concerned, this could not have happened at a better time. The Arabs needed to show the world what metal they were made of. If the English were the wind, Faisal was a hurricane. The previous year, the General Syrian Congress had announced its rejection of the Balfour Declaration and unilaterally elected Faisal as king of Syria, Lebanon, Transjordan, and Palestine. It had been the Arab retort to the Allies' decision to divide the region between Britain and France. A waiter filled everyone's glasses and everybody drank a toast. To Faisal, to Arab honor, and to the independent Arab nation. To our illustrious history, to courage and prowess, let's show them our bows, excuse me. Excited, the school teacher started to recite the ancient Arabic poem, The Ballad of the Three Witches. Thy sword and spear the foe shall rue, when his gashes let the daylight through, and blood shall flow on every hand, what time thou marchest from land to land. I can't wait to see the faces of the two British guards at the Kishle, which is across the street. Let's invite them here to share a toast with us. Labib shouted Saleh, get yourself across the square and bring us the two blondies. A swick of arak will make real men out of them. The cheers rose again, and more men came in from the street when they heard that Al-Mukhtar was offering free drinks. Saleh never drank in the middle of the day, but it was a special occasion, so he drank 2 shots before leaving the party and heading home. And with this, I would like to end with one picture from the 1920s, which is a picture of my grandfather. The little child is my father. And it's a picture of the Dabdoubs and the Jassers, who used to have businesses in France and who used to socialize on Sundays. My father spent 6 years of his childhood in Paris. So they lived in Rony-sous-Bois, and the Jassers lived in Frontenay. So I would like to end on this note, and I would like to invite you to start a discussion if you think you have questions to ask.
Thank you, Christiane. That was incredible. I think we all look forward to reading the rest of the novel now that we have this historical context there. And I'm sure I'm not the only person that hopes you will record this on tape, an audiobook, because certainly listening to it through your voice is very special and very personal. Thank you for that. This is what this series is all about, is connecting worlds that we can't touch through the voices of those that know them so well. So with that, thank you very much. Safa, would you like to give a little preview into what we can expect in February?
Thank you, Jeff. We have some exciting plans for this year. And so next month, we have Sara Bonfanti, an Italian anthropologist, who will speak about her work on gender, migration, belonging, and home. So please do, keep checking we'll get in touch with you, but please do keep checking our website, xeniaseries.com, for announcements. The month after that, so that's March, we will have a talk by Shosh Saleh, a Kurdish British artist, again on migration and home, a really fantastic artist, and many plans for months to follow. So please do keep an eye on the website and come along. We're creating this sort of small, growing family here, and we invite you to be part of it.
Thank you, Safet. That is wonderful. And thank you all again. Thank you for those that have helped support this series in the past months and going forward. We do have some other exciting plans, such as harnessing this wonderful group of anthropologists to be able to speak directly on issues that are requested. I've had a few requests from a few different corporate organizations, as well as some other special interest groups that have said, hey, you guys seem to have access to a lot of people that know a lot. Would you be able to host one of these for us? And that's certainly something that we will be doing, coming forward to engaging you with that. All of these notes coming in about where people are from. This is wonderful. I can't even keep up here. We have Fez, Santa Monica, London, a lot of London. We have Ben Gurion, we have McLean, Virginia. We have 3 people total from New Hampshire. This is exciting. Bordeaux, Bethlehem, living in Greece, some more London, Folkestone. Oh, wow. People down in the south of France, Palestine, living in New York, of course, Brooklyn, Malta. This is incredible. Ithaca, my goodness, this feels like a rock and roll tour around. More New Hampshire. Good. My mom is still in New Hampshire. That is good. And Paris. Thank you all South Africa. Woo! Now I feel like people are just shouting out countries that they've heard of before. But this is very good. Thank you all. This is so wonderful to see you all and to just share in this. So thank you all again, and thank you, Christiane.